Imagine spending 2 years of your life, thousands of dollars, and over 100 hours practicing for a single test. That is the massive, looming weight of a private pilot license practical exam. For one pilot, test day arrived with 15 knots of wind and 7 knots of crosswind, a lateral force pushing the plane sideways off the runway centerline. These conditions place the flight right on the jagged edge of the aircraft's safety limits. The designated examiner looks at the windsock, turns to the pilot, and demands an immediate answer. Is this flight a go or a no-go? When you stare down that question, 2 years of anticipation creates a massive sunk cost trap. The pressure to please an authority figure and the sheer desire to just get it over with can force even a competent person to compromise their own safety limits. Choosing relief over reality, the pilot made the call to proceed. It was a terrible decision. The weather intensified immediately after takeoff, turning the sky into a turbulent, terrifying ride inside a vulnerable RV-12 aircraft. Back on the ground, the debrief was short. The pilot failed the practical test. But the examiner's reasoning had nothing to do with how the pilot handled the yoke or the pedals. The failure was a complete lack of psychological ownership. The pilot spent the flight constantly seeking validation for maneuvers and entirely failed to prepare for worst-case scenarios. Technical proficiency means absolutely nothing if the mind driving the machine is clouded by ego and external pressure. The pilot's flight instructor was furious, not because the landing was bumpy, but because he had sent his student into a checkride with a dangerously flawed mentality. The instructor's immediate prescription was a book, Extreme Ownership, by former Navy SEALs Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. At first, the pilot rejected the premise entirely. Applying rigid special operations military doctrine to a weekend hobby in a civilian aircraft sounded ridiculous, but engaging with the text forced a painful audit of reality. The pilot realized their entire life had been governed by a cycle of making excuses, pointing fingers, and blaming bad luck for every single shortcoming. A framework demanding 100% personal accountability is deeply unnatural. It forces the human ego to sit quietly and accept all the blame, which is exactly why we instinctively fight it. To make this mindset work, you have to split your reality into 2 distinct categories: the elements you absolutely cannot change, and the variables you control completely. In aviation, the left side of that equation is unforgiving. You cannot control shifting weather patterns, sudden drops in atmospheric pressure, or a mechanical engine failure midair. What you do control is the right side. You control the extent of your weather research, your proactive emergency briefings, your ability to suppress your ego, and ultimately, that final go or no-go call. You can never blame a sudden crosswind for a disastrous flight if you failed to make the deliberate choice to stay grounded in the first place. Extreme ownership requires you to stop looking out the window for someone or something to blame and turn your focus entirely inward toward your own preparation. Aviation operates on a universal, unforgiving rule that applies to every single flight. Taking off is an option, but landing is not. Once you execute a choice, gravity takes over. You are permanently locked into the consequences of that decision, demanding that you own the outcome up front. When you adopt this mindset, your relationship with failure changes. You reach a state where you can justify any action without a trace of guilt, because you know your choice was built on the safest, most educated process available to you at the time. This exact survival framework works far beyond the cockpit. It applies directly to your career, your relationships, and the daily obstacles you navigate on the ground. Drop all the excuses. Stop blaming the external headwinds for your failures. Check your ego and take the pilot seat in your own life.